Hi, and welcome back to our study group discussing the history of philosophy without any gaps by Peter Adamson, especially his subseries on the history of classical Indian philosophy. I'm Nodalian Plebs, and today with me, Rogerio Marx and Graham Pong. Welcome back, guys.
Nice to be back.
Always fun.
So today we will be introducing yet another of the orthodox schools ultimately based on the Vedas, called this one called the Vaisheshika school. So let's see a few visual aids, a few slides, get acquainted with the school so that we may in the end perhaps discuss a bit of the school. Okay, so Vaisheshikas are known for their atomism and realist metaphysics, as we will see. This fellow here was my collaboration with AI in an attempt to recreate the likeness of Kanada, the creator of Vaisheshika. I have no idea why the continent of India is not rendering. It should be, but it's not. I'll try to start the slides again because it should be there. Okay.
Yeah, while you're trying to get the slides, Peter Adamson made a decent pun with Kannada about Gautama, like the United States, having a good pal in Kannada.
Yeah, well,
Dad jokes never disappoint.
It's much better than what popped into my head with what he Khan and Kannada do. Peg.
We're going to hell for laughing at stupid jokes like.
Okay, so following the Indian tradition, the Indian philosophical tradition, once again, the founder of an entire philosophical tradition is, well, they don't know exactly when he lived. Between 6th century BCE and the 2nd century BCE, somewhere between these eight centuries, more or less, he perhaps has lived, but things are even more mysterious when we see the chronology, as you will see in a few slides. So as for his birthplace, possibly in the Gujarat region, there in the west of India. He supposedly proposed an atomist theory with the use of logic and realism to explain basically life, the universe, and everything. He, as is usual, it's often with people from the Brahmanic caste, he led the life of an ascetic. Some of these schools were like that. He is said to have lived on grains of corn gleaned from the field. So yeah, well, he was kind of eating his representations of atoms, and so supposedly Kannada is a pseudonym meaning atom eater. As for his legacy and founding the Vaisheshika philosophical school, the Vaisheshika Sutra is attributed to Kannada, which is one of these texts that start with a phrase that says it all, that sets the tone, like, now therefore we shall explain Dharma, and then it has 10 books with many subjects that are dear to many scientists today, but in their own lexicon of the time of Kannada. And the book is, well, I have the PDF of the book that was screened from one of these temple libraries that I might manage to find in these websites, open book websites, where there's public domain books, and the book is 300 and something pages. So It's I think a commentary upon a commentary, something like that. And okay, so to give everyone a rundown on what this Vaisheshika school is in a nutshell, so there is this term Vaishesha, which actually gives the tradition its name. It is it refers to particularities, particulars, objects denoted by words. It's a bit like a metaphysical correlate. And this is a subject that is elaborately discussed in the Vaisheshika Sutra, as we will see. It is said that the Nyaya and Vaisheshika are buddies, or in other words, Samana Tantras. Basically, Samana Tantra means allied systems of philosophy. As for their pramanas, they are a bit more conservative in terms of sources of knowledge. They only accept perception and inference, and they collapse basically testimony and comparison into perception and inference, respectively, which I find rather interesting. Then they recognize only 7 padarthas. Padarthas, I remind you from our time with Nyaya, are basically the subject matters. So the Nyayas had 16, and Vaisheshika are a bit more focused, a bit more narrow in their scope, only focusing on 7. Later texts, 17th century more or less, give or take, we see texts that combine both traditions, Vaisheshika and Nyaya. As for their purpose, their goal as a school, as a philosophical school, they don't invent a lot here. The end is liberation of the individual self, and this liberation consists of the cessation of all pain and suffering, and at the root of all pain and suffering is ignorance. Fairly similar to what we've seen of the Nyaya. It's just that the Vaisheshika are a bit more realists than the other schools that we've seen so far, and they are pluralists. As for the chronology of these texts, so there are a lot of texts. Starting perhaps somewhere unknown, 6th to 2nd century BCE, as I've mentioned about Kanada. Then there are layers upon layers of commentary, first by Prajastapada, and then supposedly one by Ravana, a very ominous name because it's the antagonist in the Ramayana. And well, the Ramayana is set like 7,000 years ago or 9,000 years ago. So I couldn't even find when this text was penned down or composed or compiled, but it's no longer extant. It's only mentioned in commentary, other commentaries and other works. Then there's a lot of activity near the 10th century and afterwards. And up to the 7th century, there are still important works being put out by this school. Then some of these works, they are kind of paired together. So there's the Setu and Sukti, which are less known commentaries on Prajastapada's work. So the work from the second guy. And then we have the Vayomanti, the Kiranavali, and Nyaya Kandali, which are considered 3 well-known and excellent commentaries on Prajastapada's work. So almost, I think everyone commented on Prajastapada. They no longer commented directly on the first text. Then there's the Tarka Kamudi and Bazaparisheda, these later works. These works are known for combining Vaisheshika and Nyaya. And then we have the latest work sorted in this chronology, the Siddhanta Muktavali. It is a commentary on Bhasha Paricheda, the previous one, and the names are very, very similar. Possibly they are father and son respectively, or something like that. Some scholars even believe that it was the same Vishvanatha who wrote the first work here and commented his own work, but it's possible it was not the same person. And that's so much for an introduction to Vaisheshika. Before we go more into the Padarthas, I would like to pause here and make things open for commentary and debate. Feel free, guys.
Yeah, sure. Just small nitpicking, but I think between the 6th century BCE and the 2nd century BCE, there are only 400 years, not 800. Unless there was a typo and the 200 was CE rather than should have been.
It's a typo completely. It's a typo, yeah. It's 2nd century CE. I forgot to delete the B.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Thanks for pointing that out. Anyway.
Yeah. Other than that, not too much to comment. I think this is the longest list of commentaries we've seen so far. But then you got this from a different source, right? You got this from an Introduction to Indian Philosophy book.
Yeah.
Rather than from Peter Adamson. They don't usually include such a long list of commentaries or future works, with the exception maybe the interview with the Jar couple, where the Jar couple cited a bunch of commentaries that continued quite far into the future. But I think Peter Adamson is just focusing on the period roughly up to 800 CE, maybe about 1000 CE, and not much further than that. So yeah, looking forward to your coverage of the basic system, because Peter Adamson didn't go into a terrible lot of detail, but what I did get from Peter Adamson's take on Vaisheshika was that they more or less tried to give a refined explanation to defend common sense views about things like objects and parts of objects and qualities of objects and that kind of thing. So it all seemed pretty commonsensical, so I'm looking forward to like a nice clear exposition with lists and things.
Yeah, no, I very much like this school. Now, exactly why they have such huge issues with Nyaya isn't always clear to me. But, I definitely enjoy them and like them, and looking forward to getting into some of the nuts and bolts here. Tag.
Okay, so nuts and bolts and atoms and compounds and whatnot. Yeah, we will look at this and physics and behavior of stuff. Let's look into it, because, well, as I mentioned, the Nyayakas had a way more Padarthas, 16, and Vaisheshika focused only on 7. And so they were convinced that only these 7 were enough to live an effective life, and also to achieve liberation, which, well, they were all like car salesmen selling cars, their own cars, and the car of liberation, these vehicles of liberation, basically. So the 7 Padarthas of Vaisheshika, the first one is Dravya. They go straight for the substance stuff. Then Guna, which is basically, it means quality, literally. Karma, which means action. No woo-woo and supernatural things associated with karma. It's really action. Samanaya, generality or universal. So the Platonists, Neoplatonists might have some commonalities here. then the Vaishesha, which is particularity, the Samavaya, relation of inherence, and then the Abhava, which is non-existence. So as for the Dravya, it is basically defined by something that can act as a substratum of qualities or actions. So before you can even have guna or karma, you need something that they call Dravya. And they really cut a clear distinction between Dravya and gunas or karma. No Dravya can be confused with guna or a karma. So they even employ this word sama vaikarana, which I will share here, which means the distinction from qualities and actions. So samavaya karana, it means that Dravya is distinct from guna and karma. Also, this samavaya karana means it's constitutive or material cause of composite things produced from it. So an example could be wood and graphite, or the samavaya karanas of a pencil. So different substances are combined to make a new substance, and substances are what is necessary for gunas or qualities or karma and action to exist. Then, of course, going into the Dravya, there are 9 kinds. So the first 5 are fairly well known, the 5 elements of Hindu philosophy: Prithivi, Jala, Tejas, Vayu, and Akasha, meaning earth, water, light, air, and ether, which are paired with sense organs: smell, taste, sight, touch, sound, or hearing. And here in this image is a depiction of what is called Akichaka, a bearded man with 5 bodies representing the 5 elements. And this is found as a relief found in a giant temple in Rajasthan, India. So, of course, these notions of 5 elements are not exclusive to the Vaisheshika, but since they were seemingly useful concepts, the Vaisheshika ran with them instead of making things up from scratch necessarily. Then the Akasha is particularly interesting because it's not directly perceivable like earth, water, light, or air. It's not perceivable directly by the senses, but it's considered, the Akasha is considered the substratum of the quality of sound, of basically vibration, which is really, really important for Hindu, Brahmanic, Vedic traditions. All of them, because all of them chanted mantras, all of them used song and sound and voice to conduct rituals and to conduct pedagogy, to conduct learning from older to newer generations. And so I found it interesting, this pairing for one, and also the Akasha being something that's very, very important for people, much later scholars like Helena Blavatsky, who talks about the Akashic records, kind of like what is put in vibration stays in vibration, or something like that. Yeah, feel free to interrupt if you'd like.
Yeah, I just want to comment well, but you said like one of the pairings is a bit odd, the ether sound thing. I think like several of them are a bit odd. For one thing, like why would earth go to smell rather than air? I would think air is a more natural thing to smell, and earth would be more natural to touch. Like these pairings are like counterintuitive to me. Light and sight makes perfect sense. Water and taste is a bit surprising, but not as surprising as air and touch. I guess it must have been a part of India that was very hot, so that you would feel the air on your skin all day, every day, or very windy or something.
Yeah, the wind actually presses on people, or people feel it, and also there's atmospheric pressure as well. As for Earth, there is the smell of petrichor when it rains, which is a very, very distinct sound. So who knows? Maybe it was related to that. And also, perhaps they would associate spices with Earth more than air. They would look at air as something odorless, and things that grow from the ground might have all these qualities that smell, have intense smells. And if spices are cooked, and usually you use water to cook, then taste can conduct the basically lead the taste particles or whatnot to the tongue, to the palate. Yeah, so well, these pairings are maybe kind of like a mnemonic for them. It's not necessarily something that's actually absolutely sensical, but maybe it would be useful for children to remember, because children are much prone, or much easier to learn things that are not so metaphysical, not so abstract as their five senses. And then if you pair these five senses with quite metaphysical things, maybe you can pedagogically teach these things somehow. So that's me speculating on why there is this pairing at all. Of course, we can see that there is a subdivision in two here. Yeah, go ahead, Graham.
Oh, I was going to sit there and say, one of the things that I've learned, when I've learned the various systems from the different cultures, is to take it very much like math, and they're establishing like their postulates and axioms at this point. And a lot of times it doesn't appear obvious here, but they did it because of, it became convenient later on within the guts of their system, that they needed to combine it this way at the beginning. And, I sort of withhold judgment until I try to figure out what they actually did with the concepts. Just wanted to share that tag.
Yeah, I would even add to that by saying, well, the elements are kind of seemingly naive, because there are so many minerals that come from the earth, quartz, gold, pyrite, various gems that have nothing to do in terms of touch, smell, appearance, etc., with each other, and they just call it all earth. It's crazy. And I can understand water, that they would haven't figured out how to split water to call it an element. But then if you look attentively, you might figure out that maybe earth just means stuff that's solid, water just means fluids that are liquid, light is related to plasma, basically, stars, candles burning, etc. Air is just gas, whatever is gaseous. And the ether, well, the ether is something that might be a substrate for vibrations, etc. That's
ether is vibes, man. You can have good vibes, or you can have bad vibes.
Yeah. Douglas Adams liked to play with the idea of ether being used as a substrate for the Ethernet of the galaxy in his novels, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And as I mentioned, Helena Blavatsky, who was a scholar and member of the Theosophic Society, she studied many ancient texts from ancient India and Tibet, and she mentioned the Akash as well, the Akashic records, the kind of like the backup where all the burned books are, and so we just need to access the Akash, and we can access all these books that humanity has lost. So, wishful thinking. And so, well, the first 5 are Pankabhutas, physical elements. I can share the word here because, well, one thing is to see the word completely different from my pronunciation. So Pankabhutas. I don't know if I'm massacring the Sanskrit, and they are called physical elements because they possess Vishesha Guna, which is basically the combination of these two words that we've already learned. Vishesha, peculiar or particular, Guna, quality. So they all possess a peculiar quality that sets each of these elements apart in their system. Also, they claim that each of the senses is actually constituted by the physical element whose specific quality is sensed by it. So smell would be earthy, taste would be watery, sight would have some light quality in it, and so on. Of course, touch is kind of like sensible to pressure. Also, these substances, these elements, they are considered eternal or nitya. So, and then there are compounds that can be made by these elements. So nitya, eternal. And if you combine these elements that are nitya, that are eternal, you will create non-eternal compounds that can be dismantled. Then these atoms, as they call them, paramanu, of earth, water, light, and air. As I mentioned, they are considered eternal because they are partless. They can neither be produced nor destroyed. So the principle of conservation of mass here. So paramanu is the Sanskrit word for atom, indivisible. And as I mentioned, the compounds can be dismantled, can be destroyed as compounds to yield back the elements that constituted them. Also, it's worthwhile to mention that, of course, paramanu cannot be perceived directly. And since these folks didn't yet have microscopes, much less electron or tunneling microscopes that could we have today, and we can basically see molecules and atoms rather with a nice resolution and nice accuracy. They couldn't, so they had to rely on inference to figure out that atoms, according to their system, must exist. So their reasoning was something like this: ordinary materials are made up of parts, like the chariot of the conversation between the Buddhist monk and the Afghan king. And we can disassemble these until we arrive at the smallest parts, the so-called paramanus, which cannot be further divided in any way. So they assume that we cannot subdivide things infinitely. And then they say, their logic goes, since to produce means to combine parts, and to destroy means to break it up into its parts. And since paramanus have no parts, they cannot be produced nor destroyed. There's also this idea that if a mountain and a grain of sand had the same number of parts, they would by necessity need to be the same size. And since they clearly are not, at least from our experience, then a mountain needs to have more constituents, more parts than a grain of sand. And perhaps this is my speculation, since these people were grinding cereals to produce flour, and they probably would notice that you cannot kind of grain things even finer. There's only as fine a dust that you can produce, even with the best methods of grinding stuff, not necessarily just cereals, but even stones, grinding other stones, etc. There will be some limits to which you cannot grind things even further. It will just be an unyielding process. And so maybe experimentally it was also not direct experience of atoms, of indivisibles, but it might make them think that atoms could be a thing. Then moving on to the others. So before we get into time and space, there's an important distinction to be made. So for a substance to be perceivable according to the Vaisheshika system, it needs to have a perceptible dimension or to be big enough, basically, and to also have a manifest color. And so I will share the vocabulary here in the screen. So a Mahatva, which basically is has a prefix of great, so great enough to be perceived, and this Bhuttarupavattva word, which basically means manifest color. But I find this really strange. They just say manifest color, as if the eyes are the only thing that could perceive things. So it seems a bit contradictory for one to mention 5 senses and then mention that to perceive a substance. Manifest color is one of the essential core attributes to perceive a substance, and so, but it's what it is.
What's the word for quality again?
Guna.
Guna.
Yeah.
Right. So there's no guna in that manifest color word. There really is a color, not generalized qualitative attributes. That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's a bit odd.
Yeah, I would kind of expect them to say, well, perceivable guna, basically. So some of the gunas are ineffable and imperceivable, but they could have at least opened the thing up for, well, it would need to, it could be tasteable, for instance. But maybe they would have an answer to that as well. They could say, yeah, maybe you do taste atoms, but how can you tell if you're tasting atoms or compounds? Or maybe you do touch atoms with your skin, but how can you tell them apart from larger compounds? You cannot. And so maybe they are mentioning that since the eyes, the sight has this quality of resolving things, of showing a separation between things, that smell, taste, and touch, maybe they aren't so geared to discriminate. They insist that things would need to not be colorless, basically, which is really interesting because stuff that is small enough does not interact with visible light and thus is colorless. Physics nowadays tells us that atoms are colorless. So I find this they kind of got it right there in some respects. Also, going to Akasha, Kala, and Dik, which are ethers, time, and space. Akasha, it's not limited, and it's not a colored substance. It's rather colorless according to their system, and thus it's not perceivable. Basically, Akasha is not at the right size for our perception. It's all encompassing in the universe. We cannot kind of step back and look at the Akash. We're within the Akash at all times. So it's an all-pervading bearer of the quality of sound, and it's inferred from the perception of that quality. Also, since space, time, soul, and mind can exist without sound, then there must be a substance that serves as a substrate for sound. Thus, by exclusion of hypothesis, they posit the Akash kind of like a concept in their metaphysics to fill in the gaps, and thus the Akash steps in as the necessary and exclusive substrate of sound. They really wanted to pair something with the sense of hearing. As for Dik and Kala, time and space, or space and time, these are also imperceptible. They are whole, eternal, and all-pervading substances as well. A space or Dik is inferred from our cognitions of here and there, while Kala, time, is the cause of our cognitions of past, present, future, older, and younger. And so they were kind of naively, or maybe wisely, positing that since we have cognitions that intuit the existence of space and time, then space and time must be real. So since Akash, Dik, and Kala are in reality wholes, but are perceived by us always indirectly and in partiality, we have, and probably always have, imperfect knowledge of them. And then moving on to the Atma, so the soul for the Vaisheshikas. They also consider the Atma an all-pervading substance. It is the substratum of consciousness. And they posit two kinds of Atma. So there is the Jivatma, individual soul which possesses the gunas. I'll share here the Jivatma. And then there is the Paramatma, or supreme soul. Paramatma or Ishvara. Ishvara is a word for the Lord. So supreme soul is and it infers as the creator of the world. As for Manas, Manas is the internal sense. And I'll share with you the word in Sanskrit, the Antarindriya, the internal sense. And it has its own particular gunas, like pleasure and pain. It's also considered atomic, or rather it's considered a paramanu, and it lacks mahatva, it lacks a perceptible dimension, and is also colorless. This rather long word that I probably massacred its pronunciation. And thus it cannot be perceived. Again, they use inference to project that Manas exists. The first line of reasoning is, just as we can use external senses to perceive external objects, thus there must be an internal sense that allows us to perceive qualities of inner objects, like our soul, cognition, feeling, and willing. And so thus they infer that there must be an internal sense which is called Manas. They just call it Manas. The second line of reasoning has to do with some limitation of what they call Manas. So we can arguably get sensory input from multiple senses all at once and simultaneously. But we can only shift our attention to one of these inputs at a time. So they argue. since that happens, that limitation is a thing, there must be an internal sense that limits the number of perceptions to one at a time, and thus the order of perceptions to one of succession is, which means one after the other. Basically, if we are handshaking someone, we first see the person, then we shift our attention to the handshake, and then we shift our attention back to seeing the person, basically, in their worldview. So they say that every perception requires contact with an inner sense organ that is limited to one at a time. And thus this internal sense is what they call manas. And since it is limited to one perception at a time, they do a double whammy inference here and say that it is partless or atomic. Or to get the words again here, it's indivisible. It's what was the word for atom again? Paramanu or something like that. Okay, so moving on, there is also the gunas, of course. Here I have a screen of an image that represents the 108 divisions of gunas. It's a guna chakra, basically. The ancient Hindus really like the number 108. There's also the 108 most important Upanishads, and so there you have it. So guna means quality. And they kind of remind me, when they are related to cognition and psychology, they kind of make me think about the archetypes of Carl Jung as well. Guna is that which exists in a substance and has no quality or activity in itself. So it's always standing on a substrate, which is one of the substances. So every quality must belong to some substance. Otherwise, it won't be a thing. It won't manifest. The gunas are never constitutive causes of anything. They also determine the nature and character of substances, but never the existence of these substances. Also, there cannot be gunas attached to other gunas. So these are kind of like the ground rules for the gunas. Then they did us a favor and listed 24 gunas. So color, taste, smell, and touch, sound, number, which is a familiar word, sankhya, parimana, magnitude, distinctness, conjunction, disjunction, remoteness, and nearness. Then we have buddhi, cognition, sukha and dukkha, pleasure and pain, ichha, dvesa, desire and aversion. Then there is a prayatna, effort, gurutva, heaviness, fluidity, viscosity, tendency, merit, and demerit. So we see a mix of psychological, what we would call psychological attributes, logical operators, with the conjunction is the disjunction, and also ethical words, merit and demerit, physical attributes, heaviness, fluidity, viscosity. So there's a mix here of a bunch of what we would call different fields of inquiry, different fields of philosophy even. Going back here just to see if I forgot anything. So just to touch on some of the subdivisions, like sound could be subdivided in Dvani or Varna, which means Dvani means inarticulate, which is a sound that has no verbal quality to it, no word can be perceived, and okay, Dhvani is an inarticulate, has no words, and Varna is a sound that is phonetic. It's related to the pronunciation of a letter. As for magnitude, they list extremely small, large, and extremely great. And then there's as for Praktva, it's distinctiveness means quality that allows one to distinguish between two objects. And as for conjunction and disjunction, so conjunction, union between two or more things. It can be to a motion of one of the things that is conjoined, to motions of both things that are conjoined, or even due to another conjunction. Kind of like when we are writing with a pencil, we are our hand is conjoined with the pencil, and the movement of our hand makes the pencil move as well. But you also have two dancers who both move and move in such a way that is not disruptive to their conjunction, or to another conjunction, like people that are in the back of a taxi and they're holding hands or something like that, but their conjunction with the taxi is what's keeping them going together, basically. Then disjunction is the same thing, but it describes motions that are making things break apart, basically. It can be the movement of one thing, both things, like two balls hitting each other, or even another disjunction. And then remoteness or nearness, these both can be temporal or spatial. Then the buddhi, so it's basically the manifestation of objects in cognitions. And this is where knowledge resides, basically. Then as for effort, prayatna, it subdivides into three: pravrti, nivrti, and jiva nayani, which means striving towards something, like people that want money, they work for money, or striving away from something, like people fleeing from telemarketers or something like that. And then there is jiva noyoni, or vital function, which to me it strikes as what creates preservation of self-preserving beings, homeostasis and whatnot. Then gurutva, or heaviness, is the cause of objects falling. It's pretty much reminds me of mass. Then there is fluidity and viscosity, which are respectively the cause of flowing, and the second one, the cause of adhesion. One famous example ready at hand of adhesion is the surface tension of water. Water does all these really beautiful behaviors, like when you open a tap and put a spoon underneath, and the water just makes a very beautiful foil due to the adherence of water molecules to each other. They don't just break apart so easily. Then there is a samskara tendency, which might be velocity, or as they call it, vega. It can be mental impressions or bhavana. I will share here the words. So the samskaras, vega or velocity, bhavana or mental impressions, this very big word, sthiti sthapakatava, which means elasticity. Probably they knew their sinews very well and how to construct bows and catapults and whatnot. Then there is dharma and adharma. So merit, meaning virtue resulting from the performance of desirable or praised acts, while adharma means vice resulting from the performance of forbidden acts. And this so much for the gunas or Vaisheshika. Here is the interior of a temple in it's the Meenakshi Hindu temple in Tamil Nadu, southern India. I found it really interesting to share as well, because it's an ancient piece of architecture, but it's quite impressive. So as for the gunas, the numbering of these 24 was done by the Vaisheshikas with the aim of attaining simplicity, indivisibility, irreducibility, and undoubtful distinctness. So in their minds, these 24 were not prone to being confused, to be mistaken for each other, and they don't, according to them, have any overlap. They're clear cut and clearly distinct. Okay, before going forward with the other padarthas, feel free to comment, and if you guys would like, I can show you the gunas again while you comment.
Yeah, so something that I noticed is they translated dukkha with pain here instead of suffering. Did you see any mention of the distinction between suffering and pain, or whether they use it more in the sense of pain or more in the sense of suffering?
Well, it depends. Perhaps if they are making a reference to dukkha of manas, the suffering of the mind, or bodily suffering. It might have to do with that, because, well, at least we are tempted to distinguish between pain and suffering by pain being much more physically related and suffering being much more psychologically related. I'm not sure if that is the reason why they have translated it differently, but it might have to do with why dukkha is such a difficult word to put a finger on, because it might depend on this broad context, for one, between bodily or mental pain / suffering, or it might even have to do with the actual tradition that is talking about, that is employing the word dukkha. It's not unheard of traditions to appropriate terms from one another, and then narrowing down the definition and using it for a more technical, very narrow use instead of a more broader use by the previous tradition. So I'm not sure about that, but maybe it has to do with pain, the distinction that we common sensely make between pain and suffering.
Yeah, another one that's a bit like that is trying to pin down the meaning of karma, which also appears like it depends on context and which tradition you're talking about. It gets defined in different ways.
Yeah. You can have a tradition like this one that mentions nothing about rebirth, as I found here in the materials in preparation for this session. They don't mention rebirth at all. They only are concerned with escaping definitely pain and suffering in life, and they don't talk about afterlife or anything like that. And they talk about karma in a very, very physical sense. So if you do stuff happens as consequence of your stuff, and chances are, if you're doing something that annoys, disturbs, or frightens, or in any other way causes bad feelings in other people, bad experience, chances are you're ramping up your chances of getting an undesirable experience yourself, in a sense. So nothing supernatural there. You can common sensely follow this reasoning of why karma works like the Vaisheshikas describe it.
Yeah, thanks. It's me, Graham.
Yeah, I was going to sit there and say I actually sort pain and suffering a little different. To me, pain is much more of an instantaneous short term, and suffering is much more of a duration, an ongoing sort of event. It's like, that's how I tend to link those two. And listening to this, what jumps out to me is how similar this is to like a lot of Bertrand Russell's thoughts, where they're dealing with sets and categories, and it's like you can see the gunas, and that's you can only perceive the qualities, the gunas, but you don't perceive the substance in which the guna adheres. And it's sort of like, you have your souls, which are like sets, and then you have the soul of souls, which is like the category over the sets. And that's just it's the parallels between this and Russell's thought that I just find very fascinating and interesting. Just wanted to tag on that.
It would be even more interesting to know what has Bertrand Russell been reading.
Yeah, I wanted to say, I think Peter Adamson draws another analogy with Bertrand Russell specifically when, I think in the next episode that we'll discuss next week, when they talk about wholes and parts, saying that their view is very similar to Bertrand Russell, but I forget details now. But yeah, I don't know, I guess it's conceivable that Russell was somewhat influenced by Vaisheshika thought. He was also reading Frege and Bull and those kind of chaps as well, and Whitehead. Yeah.
Well, Russell lived in a time that's really tempting for us to kind of infer that he might have had these materials ready at hand from Titanic translators like Max Muller, who also ushered in the Upanishads for the likes of Arthur Schopenhauer in the 19th century. And so Bertrand Russell had likely the translations to English of these some of these texts, and so it's possible. We could only be certain if we had access to his library and his notes to be certain, but it's possible. It's entirely possible that he might have studied some Vaisheshika, Nyaya, and others.
It would have been good academic form of him to cite if he did use their ideas. So yeah, we would also be accusing him of plagiarism if he didn't. If it was clear that his ideas were influenced and he didn't cite them. And I believe he did cite people he built on top of. But actually, like, I think it broadly in the field of mathematics, the standards for citation and drawing your work back to prior work is quite weak. And it's quite rare, I think, for mathematicians to study the history of mathematics. Actually, it's true for many disciplines that like professionals or lecturers in the discipline are unlikely to be trained extensively in the history of the subject. So yeah, but I think standards of citation are stronger in fields like law and psychology and
the physical sciences, perhaps?
No, I think even in the physical sciences it's quite weak. I think specifically law, psychology, and maybe management, I wanted to say. I'm not sure about management, though. But like some of the citation manuals and reference manuals are from the APA and from law schools and stuff like that. Or the Psychological Association and from law schools. And so they generally have higher standards for lit reviews and for strict citations. And it's actually like reading modern psychology text, like a journal article or even a psychology textbook. It gets used to, like gets taken used to have like every sentence, the half of the sentence just be parentheses with people's names and dates, and sort of ignoring names and dates. And so you have like a bit of a sentence, and then there's a bunch of names and dates you have to ignore, and then there's a bit of a sentence, and then there's some more bit of a sentence. You're kind of jumping around reading sentences because there are so many names and dates. So that's, I guess, actually takes some getting used to read that kind of literature, and it's quite annoying, but at least there's people who contributed to a field get properly credited, whereas most mathematics textbooks would just say, yeah, so here's what vectors are, here's how they work, here's so that, and they just give you a whole bunch of stuff, and like at the end they'd be like, oh, by the way, like 300 years ago there was a guy that did some stuff, and 400 years after that there was, well, before that was another guy who did some stuff, so they'll cite like 3 or 4 people, and like
They
in
would
the
all
whole
need
chapter.
to cite. They would all need to cite guys like this one here. Let's see.
Oh, you're disappearing.
This guy here.
Descartes.
Yeah, Descartes. Exactly, this
forsake.
guy here. Yeah, they would all need to cite this guy, Leibniz, Newton, you know, the works. But yeah, I think there has been a huge appropriation of materials in the history of thought from different geographies, not necessarily just between East and West, without people necessarily citing where they got these ideas from. Like, as we've mentioned, Nietzsche got some really interesting ideas that are similar to Tamas Rajas and Sattva, the camel, lion, and child phases of development. And he clearly had the translations in German by Max Müller. And he wrote extensively about these things, Schopenhauer as well, and probably other philosophers of this German golden age. But we can only indirectly get an idea that what they were reading and what was inspiring their works, because for the most part, at least what I understand, is they were not explicit in where the sources of nice ideas of theirs came from. And so we tend to perceive, I think, many thinkers as being like titans of philosophy, self-made titans of philosophy that came up with brilliant ideas by themselves. While the reality is far from the case, because these people absorbed works from others and constructed from starting points. So I think it's really, really important to attempt to reconstruct the flow of thought, to figure out what's the thinkers that people might idolize as eminent, brilliant, etc. thinkers, to not just inquire and criticize the thoughts that they are putting out there, they are publishing, but also to ask what these guys have been reading, what they have been studying before they came up with all these ideas. Because I think that's a really interesting exercise. Like, for instance, I got the list of books of Frederick Douglass, this slave turned leader of the abolitionist movement. And he had the Homeric works, Marcus Aurelius, Meditations, Richard Dickens, etc., etc. He read a lot of interesting literature that for sure made him a more interesting and a more brilliant person, infused him with ideas. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind, that I think there's no self-made thinkers.
I agree 100%. And I think another thing that's important to keep into account is just because they're not citing somebody doesn't mean they weren't influenced, and it's not nefarious. It may be just it's unconscious. They had integrated the material, they had read it, and they didn't cite it because they weren't aware that they were pulling it from. It's how a lot of songs get plagiarized when the author, they weren't intending to it. It's just all of a sudden the song clicks in their head and it just flows. And I don't think that we need to necessarily throw shade at a thinker just because he didn't cite somebody. Tag.
Yeah, that's not how it works in psychology. You get thrown shade at for not doing your homework and finding out other people who did work similar to you. You could ask your librarian if anyone else ever said anything similar to you, and then you can trace back. You might find like, oh, like this sounds very familiar because I've read it before. But yeah, it's not in all fields that's the standard. I don't even think it's a standard everywhere in psychology, but that's more or less the idea I got from studying psychology at university. Like, if it's almost illegal to have original ideas because you have to cite someone for anything. Like, you have to be very careful about even claiming any kind of originality. So it was jarring to go from writing psychology essays to writing operations research essays, where people would be like, "Nah, dude, just do the math. Don't worry about the citations."
I'm just gonna show this. Yep.
I've been wondering about that. Actually, it was funny that that meme came up for you. Like, you posted it on the Discord about this week, and just a couple of days before it, I saw someone on the psychology subreddit legit asking, how do they cite a dream? They may have seen the same meme on Twitter or whatever, but they had a essay that they were writing and they wanted to cite a dream, and they asked, like, I don't know, academic psychology subreddit or whatever, hey guys, how do I go about citing a dream? So I was thinking about that. You don't exactly cite it. You just, in your sentence, you just say. You can say the authors imagine, or the authors believe, or if you're speaking in the third person, as like if you're writing a professional thing, it's usual to speak in the third person. Or if you're speaking in the first person voice, you can say, like, it seems plausible to me,
speculate.
or I've speculate, or I envision would be a good verb for that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. So let's keep going. We just need to talk about karma and the rest. Let's see. So
karma and liberation. That's all we have to talk about ever when we're doing
let's
Indian
get
philosophy.
down to business. Yeah, this is the nuts and bolts, the business of Indian philosophy. This is the this is the KPIs, the key performance indicators. Okay, so action is physical movement. We're talking about the realist atomists, Vaisheshikas, of course. Although karma always belongs to a dravya, a substance, just like what happens with the gunas. Karma is distinct from both dravyas and gunas. It's really important to tell them apart very clearly and never confuse them. So karma is dynamic in contrast to the gunas, which are passive. Karma is also transitive. It's a transitive process that mediates relationships between substances, like namely relations of cause and effect. I didn't even get any more examples, so maybe karma is actually only the actions being mediated through relations of cause and effect, which seems more or less plausible to me. Also, karma must subsist in limited corporeal substances, and so there is this term Murtadravya. So Murtadravya means that karma subsists in limited corporeal substances. Also, there can be no action or motion in the all-pervading substances like Akasha, space, time, and the soul, because these are all-pervading things that cannot change their position, and thus if a person becomes all soul, basically, they are free, entirely free from karma. I would draw an inherence from this. Then we have 5 types of karma. So basically, Utksepana, throwing something upward, Avaksepana, throwing something downward, Akunkana and Prasarana, which mean contraction and expansion respectively, and Gamana, which is the catch-all category for stuff that doesn't fit into the previous 4 categories, and they call it gamana, or as we translate it, locomotion. So examples for Utksepana is what ISRO does best: launch stuff into space, throwing upward. And while throwing downward, of course, dropping a ball or something like that, dropping a mic, as we can do when we tag out. Also, the Akunkana and Prasarana, it could be exemplified as one who clenches one's fingers or releases the fingers and opens the hand again, while the Gamana, many things can be gamanas, from a person walking or running to perhaps even the blood flow or something like that. Not all karma is perceivable, though, because mind or manas, being a substance, it can also be attached to karma, or give rise to karma, or give rise to action, and they do not admit ordinary perception. So arguably, if they say it does not admit ordinary perception, we will need extraordinary perception to figure out the karma of the mind. Perhaps this is what mystical practices are for, like meditation, poetry, song, dance, substances. Then here we have samanya, which are the universals. This is a relief of the goddess Lakshmi, which is described with the epithet Samanya Lakshmi, which basically means the universal goddess, basically. Thus, giving me an example to use this word Samanya, basically. So things of a certain and now people who agree with Heidegger won't find this, won't agree with this. The Vaisheshikas think that things of a certain class share a samanya, or a generality, so an essential attribute that actually explains the existence of the class. So a general idea, or a class, or class concept. It's the universal in them, as Western philosophers since the time of Plato might say. Then there are different ways to think about these samanyas. The Buddhists have a nominalistic view, so they think, they posit, or they argue that the idea of sameness is merely a product of using language to basically name a number of individuals of a certain character. So it's basically calling them the same name. So basically we call cows cows, and so they are part of the same group because they share this cow word. And thus, according to the Buddhists, there actually is no universal, but just a name with a negative connotation, because when we say cow, we are grouping things not in virtue of their cowness, but in virtue of all of them sharing the absence of non-cowness, basically. Then as for the Jainas and Advaita Vedantins, here is a Jain monk meditating in a temple. They have a more conceptualist view. They say that the universal does not stand for any independent entity over and above the particulars. They say that the universal is constituted by the essential common attributes of all the particulars. So this universal it's not confined to the mind of the philosopher that is considering the universal, but it actually exists inextricably in the particulars that partake in it. So universal actually is their common nature of these cows or whatnot. As for the Vaisheshikas, they have a realistic view. They say that each universal is nitya, which means it's an eternal entity. So I'll share the word again. Nitya, which is distinct from, but is anakanugata. It resides in the plurality or inheres in the plurality. I'll share again as well. Anakanugata resides in the plurality or inheres in the plurality. Universals, according to the Vaisheshika, do not come under existence, so they are devoid of sata, and they also, so sata, I'll share the word as well. So they do not have this property of sata. They also do not exist in space and time, but have being and subsist in substance. So let's see. So they have this terminology, dravaguna karma vritti. So they these universals dwell either in substance, attributes, or action. So they either reside in dravya or guna or in karma. And then there's vritti, which basically means thought. And then they also say that the universals cannot subsist in other universals because that would bring about contradictions. You need a clear-cut and direct relationship between universals and these three possible substrates of universals, but you cannot have universals mixing with other universals. Then there are three types of samanya. So there is the para, highest and all-pervading, and the example is sata, or beinghood. I'll share the word as well. So sata, or beinghood, is the highest universal, since all others are less encompassing, basically, than sata. Then there is para, which is the intermediate universals, and an example is dravyatva, which means thinghood. Basically, dravyatva, it means stuff or matter. And then as for the lowest apara, an example would be gatatva, which means jarness. And of course, this is completely an arbitrary example because there are so many other things at the same level of jarness. While at least in the para, probably there are way less. That's it even reflects in the pradarthas. Then as for the fifth vishesha, particularity, This is the extreme opposite of number 4, Samanya. So particularity. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Roger. Just before we move on from the universals in generality, from the next episode, there's something interesting that Peter Adamson said about the universals, and I just like it's just a when he talks about the inherence thing about the Vaishesikas, he says the Vaishesikas are convinced that the universal nature of crocodiles is a real thing, but they're also convinced that its reality depends on there being actual particular crocodiles like Gina. If we got rid of him and all other crocodiles, there would no longer be a universal. Thus we can say that the universal is inseparable from its instances, unlike the transcendent forms acknowledged by Platonists in ancient Greek philosophy, and more like the kind of immanent universals recognized by the Aristotelian colleagues. So yeah, I wanted to, because you brought up Plato a while ago, and I just thought it would be good to point out that maybe they're a little bit more similar to Aristotle's treatment of universals than Plato's specifically. But yeah, that's all.
Yeah, and just to go back to their idea, well, it's strange because in my notes from the Philosophy of India introduction book, where I got this idea that for the Vaisheshikas, according to this book, each universal is Nitya, so it's an eternal entity. So it kind of goes against what Peter Adamson and Jonardin said, but maybe there are different branches of Vaisheshikas that have a different view regarding whether the universal can continue to exist or not if the objects that partake in that universal, like crocodiles, if crocodileness would disappear without the without crocodiles, if crocodileness disappears, I'm not sure if this is actually a disagreement between Vaisheshikas or the book that I'm reading made a mistake here, or vice versa.
My guess would be that the book you're reading may be referring to later Vaisheshika thoughts. Actually, the idea that there could be different authors in the Vaisheshika tradition with different stances on this question makes a bit of sense. That's often the case. And I think Peter Adamson and Jonardin Ganeri only focus on the first two texts, so the Sutra and the early commentary, and not any of the later work.
Mhm.
So maybe they could be reflecting. I forget who or what that first commentary's name was and what the author was. Is something with a P, but I don't really remember the P.
Yeah.
Could be that.
Yeah, this book actually gives a few arguments for why they say universals are Nitya. They say that they do not come under existence. They are not subjects. They are not sata. So also they cannot be created or destroyed. They are kind of like as if in an indexing system of the universe or something like that, the source code of the universe, as if it were. And they also don't exist in time and space. So it's kind of like they're in the Akash, and thus, even if crocodiles would go extinct, which probably they won't anytime soon, it's much more. We are much more prone, I think, to extinction than these crocodiles. I think nature would recur in creating crocodileness again in some other form, and this has, I think, happened in the past, because when I was looking at the past 700 million years of life, there have been beings that are classified as dinosaurs, and you look at them and think, this is a crocodile, isn't it? It really looks like a crocodile. It behaves like a crocodile, but they say, no, it's a dinosaur. And so there are some forms of body makeup or behavior or whatnot that are recurring. And they might be recurring, and they might be persistent in stuff, in matter, because there is some reason for why they are successful or something like that. It might be also an argument for why some thinkers posit that other civilizations in the universe might have a predisposition to also converge toward a hominid body shape, even though they might come from different evolutionary paths. But our sample for that argument is very, very scarce, of only one example. So we have no idea. But it kind of makes common sense. So, but I won't hold any. I won't put my hands on the flame for that. But anyway, I do think that universals might exist outside of our minds and outside of the things that inhere in them. It's plausible, but we cannot be 100% sure.
I was going to sit there and say, I kind of wonder how different crocodile-ness is than alligator-ness. Because, like you were talking, Rogerio, about, that they're basically, I have trouble telling them apart. I know there are ways, but it's above my pay grade. And that they're very, very similar, and that goes back to what I'm picking up again using the whole math analogy. The universals, they appear to me to be like attractor states, in like an abstract space. And that's where they exist, and it's like they're dependent on the underlying substrate, but because of like the math behind it, they're also like different and above the substrate at the same time. I don't know if that resonates with you guys, but that's just kind of how it's coming across to me. Tag.
Yeah, another example. The islands of stabilities that make elemental atoms stable, actually. There is mathematics and optimization that makes atomic element, not actually atoms, but these agglomerates of protons, neutrons, these nuclei that are stable, while others just with one extra proton or one less proton or neutron would collapse and fuse and perform fission or any other atomic reactions of change. And so, yeah, I think there's these kind of like stable states that really might attract behaviors of matter towards them. And that might explain why certain species like crocodiles or others similar to crocodiles might be so successful in the history of life on Earth. Okay, taking out.
Yeah, I don't have too much to say. It's like very amusing to me. This the existence or non-existence of universals is like one of those things in metaphysics that I commonly bring up as an example for things that I don't think are practically super important. Like you could take the nominalist view, like the Buddhist view you gave, where you see, well, it's just a way of talking about things. Yes. Or you can take the realist view and you say like, no, it's not just a way of talking about things. That's the way the world actually works. And like when it comes to deciding how to achieve liberation or deciding how to achieve financial independence or deciding who to marry or whatever, like it makes no difference, like absolutely zero difference whether you're a nominalist or a realist. So I think maybe in the history of philosophy, like too much time has been spent arguing over, it's like, are they real or are they just names for things or convenient for speaking about things? But what I wanted to bring up is this notion of stable attractor states. Like stability could be a relative notion, because like what might be stable would be, say, the heat death of the universe, which would just continue to exist for unfathomable amounts of time compared to even like the entirety of the history of the universe so far. And so that like all the things like crocodile-ness that we consider to be very stable may, like on cosmic scales, really just be a flicker that flickered in and out of existence really quickly, where like the almost 100% of the time, the universe might just be in a heat death state where nothing much interesting happens at all, or no like stable patterns are discernible at all. If that were the case, like if we're heading towards if the universe is heading towards heat death of the universe, where there's no discernible patterns anywhere, in that case, I think the argument that those discernible patterns are that we currently find and like has been around for however many billions or trillions of years the universe has supposedly been around, that wouldn't be then a good argument for realism. But I'm very upset now because I realize I've just sided with the damn Buddhists on an issue. So
Well,
I'll
the Buddhists,
stop there.
the Buddhists might have, in partiality, heeded the supposed warning of the Buddha to tell them don't worry too much about this metaphysical stuff. Maybe because in the back of his mind he was saying, this is kind of like a video game that it really doesn't matter in the end when you log off. It's kind of like these people putting stats from World of Warcraft in a spreadsheet and calculating using quite advanced math, maybe even discovering entire fields of math just to optimize their damn game. And now they're probably fed up with the World of Warcraft game to never play again. So they kind of liberated themselves from the game. And all this metaphysical, mathematical work that they poured into it, it's just all for naught. So I'm tempted to think that maybe the Buddha was thinking somewhere along these lines, and thus some of their more kind of practical ways of looking at metaphysics, if at all.
Yeah, I try to distinguish between the Buddha and Buddhists. A lot of the things Buddha said, the Buddhists don't actually follow. And just to put you at ease, Nerdalian, even a stop clock is right twice a day. So yeah, I figure the Buddhists are going to be right once in a while.
Yeah. Okay, it's always interesting to see that even among all the stuff that we don't agree with certain traditions, sometimes there's the odd thing where there's agreement. Okay. Then besides the Vishesha, there is the last two categories, the Samavaya, which is the relation of inherence. And thus, at least my interpretation was, this is what the Vaisheshikas posited as explaining how do these universals come to have a relationship with the particulars. Samavaya was the word that they come up with. So it's also a permanent or eternal thing. And it describes the relation between two entities, of which one inheres in the other. It connects universals to particulars. Samavaya is perceptible according to Nyaya, but not so according to Vaisheshika. I kind of agree more with the Vaisheshika. Even universals are hard enough to fathom, much less this subtle relationship between universals and particulars. So the example is, while a man can stand up from a chair to end their conjunction of sitting on a chair, a man will always be a whole that is related to its parts. And if these parts would come apart, the man would stop being a man. It's a bit like if you have a triangle and you made of sticks, for instance, and you break it apart, you can no longer call it a triangle because the essential attributes that gave it its triangleness are no longer there. Of course, I'm talking about Euclidean space, Nerdal. No reason to get out of normal space, 3D space. The terms related by Samavaya cannot be reversed. like those related to some yoga, so guna or conjunction. So while in conjunctions, you can have two people interacting with each other, high-fiving or something like that, and the interaction it's not directional. When we're talking about Samavaya, it's a one direction only. So even this graphic that I put here of the double-sided arrows wasn't a good choice in afterthought. Then there is the most basically the zero of the Vaisheshika metaphysics, which I'm not sure, but maybe it even inspired people to think about zero, which is the abhava or non-existence. It stands for all negative facts like non-existence of things, which contrasts with all the previous six, which were of course positive realities. And although Kanada, the founder of Vaisheshika, did not mention abhava as a separate category, he did in the enumeration of ultimate objects of knowledge. Some scholars think it was a later addition by commenters, but it's also possible that one can infer that abhava is actually a padartha, because Kanada also describes non-existence kind of outside of the enumeration. So if Kanada did not recognize abhava as a padartha, the commenters certainly did, and nowadays everyone recognizes abhava as a padartha. So it posits that reality of non-existence cannot be denied, and so you cannot say with complete confidence that there is not a teapot orbiting the sun between Mars and Jupiter. No one can say that with 100% confidence. So also, since non-existence as a possible object of knowledge has been this I already said, that it's reasonable to consider abhava as one of the padarthas, because it was commented in other parts of the Vaisheshika Sutra. Then there are Sabhava divides into two major groups. Samsargabhava, which means the absence of something in something else, kind of like a person who skipped classes is no longer in their chair, or anyonyabhava, one thing is not another thing, kind of like a confirmed male is not a female, and vice versa, which is a very nowadays a very risky thing to say, I think. As for the first category, Samsargabhava, it subdivides into further three types. Pragabhava, which means, let's see, antecedent non-existence, which is the non-existence of a thing before its production, kind of like a pile of bricks. Is not a house yet, while the Dvamshabhava is the non-existence of a thing on account of its destruction after production. And then finally, the third one, Atyantabhava, means the absolute non-existence it is the absence of a connection between two things for all time, past, present, and future. So something that does not exist, never existed, and cannot exist anytime in the future. So, for instance, one of the things that came up when I was researching this was, for instance, this idea of Bhava Padartha. So Bhava Padartha, I'll share it here. So it says that positive entities which are produced must be destroyed. So like a pot, it eventually will be destroyed. So this is Bhava Padartha. Then you have the Abhava Padartha, which I will share as well. Abhava Padartha means negative entities which are produced cannot be destroyed. So if you destroy a pot, you cannot destroy that destroyed pot, basically. It's destroyed forever, which I found really, really interesting. So, for instance, the non-existence of a broken jar cannot itself be destroyed, because to destroy or end the jar's non-existence, we are to restore the same jar to existence, which is impossible. You can only kind of kintsugi the crap out of the jar and make something entirely different with the glue between the cracks and the gold lacquer and whatnot, and you create something else. So this is a Japanese concept, of course. I'm leaving India for a sec. All objects denoted by words may be broadly divided into two classes, namely being and non-being, bhava and abhava. So these major categories, basically. These are the major categories of ontology. And this is, again, Kanada. And this was the intro to Vaisheshika, all these lists that these guys have and explanations of these lists. And so I'm tagging out, and guys, feel free to add stuff that I might have missed or point out something that's not right.
No, I just, this Abhava Padartha notion where something once destroyed cannot be recreated made me thought if the authors were a little bit like Heraclitus, they might have said something, an object cannot be created twice. So like once an object has been destroyed, there's no recreating that same object ever. Or some thinking like that may go into it. I'm not sure that's correct though. I'm not sure I agree with that.
I thought they were saying you can't destroy the same object twice.
Yes, you can't destroy the same object twice because you can't it's impossible to undestroy the object in the first place. Once it's destroyed once, it'll remain destroyed. You can't destroy the destructed. You can't destroy the destructiveness of the destroyed thing.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't make it undestroyed.
You can't nullify the now non-existence of something that has existed for a brief amount of time in the timeline of this ontology, and you cannot basically travel back in time, as it were.
Yeah. So an interesting question would be to ask whether the Vaisheshikas reckon a person is destroyed upon death.
It seems the case.
Yeah. So they may want to argue something like reincarnation is not possible. Like once a person is destroyed, there's no bringing that person back.
Yeah. At least there is absolutely no talk of reincarnation on this material, neither against it or in favor of it. So it was not even a thing that concerned them, as in opposition to Nyaya, which actually did go quite a bit into reincarnation.
I was going to say they might also differentiate between the body and the soul, where the body can be destroyed, but the soul will continue on. And that gets kind of into our karma discussion for next week. Tag.
Yeah, they posit that the Atman subdivides into the individual soul and the Ishvara. So it's the to go back, I'll go back to the place where we were showing the.
Yeah, so it makes
Atman.
sense if they would say that Ishvara can't be destroyed, the Lord or the
Yeah.
superordinate soul or something like that.
Yeah. Exactly. They mention there are two kinds of Atma. I'll share. I don't know if the entire text will be there. Yeah.
I think you may have shared it earlier. Yeah, you.
Yeah.
Oh,
It went into two messages, so two kinds of Atma, Jivatma, individual soul which possesses gunas corresponding to thoughts and feelings. And there are different individual selves in different bodies. And then there is Paramatma or Ishvara, supreme soul, inferred as the creator of the world.
yeah.
So maybe even though our Atma side it will never die, but our Jivatma is temporary and it will only exist once.
Yeah. Like I've only now for the first time thought like what an edgy statement it would have been to wear a YOLO shirt in India for the longest time.
And maybe risky to be risky, especially if it were written in clear, understandable Devanagari script.
it would have been a super like edgy thing to do. It would have been like the equivalent of sort of wearing a inverted cross with Jesus on it in like much of Europe for a long period of history.
Oh
It would
yeah,
be like-
yeah.
it would have gotten you in a whole lot of trouble. I thought YOLO is just a silly thing kids yell when they do really stupid things that might get them killed.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And at the same time, it's an ontological statement, which is funny.
So it's actually a little interesting just to remind ourselves why we're doing or why the Vaisheshikas did all this metaphysics. So it's like especially from the next episode, it seems clear that they were motivated mostly by refuting the Buddhists, apparently, which is I can't fault them for that, but and then also in theory. I think they have this notion that all suffering and pain is caused by ignorance. So by getting ideas straight and getting your knowledge straight and understanding how the world really works, that's how you eventually going to achieve liberation. Although, at least from what we've seen today, they don't talk about liberation much, other than just that's kind of what the whole point of the exercise is.
Yeah.
Because so far from all the Orthodox schools, if I had to syncretize a couple of things or make like an eclectic mix, I think I'd take some elements from the Nyaya, some elements from Vaisheshika, and maybe some elements from yoga, and that would probably do me grand.
Mhm.
It's probably what most people did in ancient India too. So, okay.
Yeah, like the Buddhists. The Buddha got a bunch of things from the Samkhya teachers, and he was probably, at least judging by the Kalama Sutra, quite versed in logic and also natural philosophy too. So probably he got bits and pieces of different traditions due to his access to some of the best tutors. And then he went on to teach without citing his sources.
Well,
Or came to me in a dream or a meditation.
Yeah, three divine jivas told me this. I wanted to say, I think maybe when we're done with the Buddhists and the Jains, something I'd appreciate us doing, maybe it doesn't have to be on a stream, but maybe just spending some time on is do a bit of a summary of just the different schools and have a couple of bullet points for each school, like the crazy shit they said that we don't agree with, some of the stuff that seems common sense that just okay, we can go with that, but that was important for that school or is associated with the school, and then maybe some things we think are insightful or quite helpful for living a better life that's associated with the school. We have like a little just some things to say about each school, because I feel like I've forgotten most of what we've learned about prior Mimamsa already. I just remember something about like rituals and stuff.
Yeah, they say. Well, since you mentioned that, I actually have been looking at the Eliza Freshy interview. Why? Because I've been asking Eliza Freshy to help me with the transcript, because turns out this was one of the things that impeded me to get so much out of the interview, was it didn't exist any transcript. And so I managed to collaborate a bit with Eliza, and also with I've exchanged a few emails with Peter Adamson. And well, because the Philip Maas transcript wasn't there, but he then said, well, the transcript exists, it's just a link that wasn't on the website. And so I did the transcript for Note, according to him. But actually it was useful for me, because I actually paid attention to Philip Maas to make the transcript. But now, since the Eliza Freshy transcript was almost already done, but owing to the density of the Mimamsa kind of thing, and it's really a specialty thing, and there are some kind of expressions in Sanskrit that she said that are really big and difficult to Google. Almost no one was finding it, and thus I was reminded about a bunch of things of Mimamsa, like when you desire something, this desire, you need to follow through this desire by going through the rules of the Vedas that say, well, if you desire rain, you must do the ritual for asking rain, basically. And which is really, really strange, because the Mimamsa say you ask for rain, and then we ask to whom? They say, well, they just shrug, because they don't talk about any gods. So it's just a Veda that says, you know, if you want rain, do this and that in order, and you will enact the sacrifice, you will do the ritual. And then you ask, well, will this guarantee rain? No, Veda doesn't say anything about guarantees, but it says that if you have a desire for rain, you have to do that. So yeah, Mimamsa is you know, I probably won't extract many life lessons from Mimamsa, but it was fun. Then Vedanta, yeah, Vedanta is, since it is heavily based on the Upanishads, and as we've seen, the Upanishads are profound, even though not entirely in all the Upanishads profound, but there are some high points on the Upanishads that give us moments of pause and reflection. Yeah, I think it's a really great idea after we go through these Nastikas and Astikas to summarize them. And yeah, the slides that I've created and the word files, I can also share with you guys to go over them if it's useful. And in any capacity, I think it would be really interesting, because it would be the stuff of syncretism for us to get something of value for our lives.
Yeah, something else that might be fun to summarize would be make a list of the hardest hitting criticisms, like across schools, like some of the best singers that like the different schools threw at each other.
or like the response to that guy that was really hard, very hard, trying to not have any position.
Yeah.
Really slithery, sophist kind of guy. And their response to them, yeah, that was a high point that I will probably never forget. The exact wording escapes me, but you know, we can always go to the slide.
I think it was something like of all the like of what are they called? Of all the Brahmins I've ever met, he was the stupidest and most confused. So I left. I got up and left.
Yeah. Exactly. It's
My
like my
position is that I have no position. Yep.
yeah. It's like my go-to response or rebuke to hardcore idealists is to slap them on the face.
You make your own reality. Make the pain go away. I have nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
The old, nobody can make anybody feel anything else. Okay, let me stomp on your foot for a while and tell me you don't feel anything. Dag.
Yeah. Well, I guess we will go through and finish the Vaisheshika in next session. And I think after the Vaisheshika is actually these two schools, the Jains and the Buddhists, right?
I think we're gonna do Charvakas also still, and there's gonna be an interview or two before we get to the Buddhists and the Jainas.
Yeah,
So you
we
get 2
have
episodes
this-
on Charvakas and like 2 interviews or something.
Yeah, the Indian naturalism Charvaka and the Lokata, which disappeared. Yeah, materialism and the self, which 2 episodes basically on the Charvakas, and an interview with Monima Chada. And finally, the aesthetics of Rasa, which ends everything.
Is that aesthetics one also an interview? Or is that not an interview, just a...
No, it's an actual episode on
Oh.
Hindu aesthetics. They will explore drama, music, and poetry. And this is the end of the Sutra age, and the third part is completely devoted to Buddhists and Jains. It will be fun for you, Nurdal. It will be fun. It's just Buddhists and Jains. The Jains you didn't even kind of challenge with refutation. You just thought that they were their lifestyle was ridiculous. While the Buddhists, you have a lot of story together.
Yeah, well, all the Jains do is they stick to their temples and they sweep the floors above them. I've met some people who call themselves Buddhists, and yeah, I didn't like them, as it turned out.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I think like a lot of emotions originate more from interpersonal dynamics than they do from ideas. So I think a lot of people who are like really against religion or whatever, probably they had like really bad interactions with priests or their parents regarding, or like important people in their lives regarding religion, and that might be why they're it would make more sense if the strong feelings came from those interactions. Rather than the ideas themselves, because like if you don't agree with the idea, you can just say that doesn't make any fucking sense and like carry on. But then if you're close to people who sort of won't allow you to disagree, or who you enter into interpersonal conflict with about the disagreement, then that makes a bit more sense to get upset about.
that's why it's so important to be able to get up and leave in many situations. And especially if you are backed with a nice literacy to identify undesirables, people who you don't want to hang around with. You just want to learn from them what not to do, what not to be from a distance, from afar, so you don't get emotionally enmeshed and whatnot. And so it really pays to curate very stringently who you hang out with, whether in a religious situation, collectivism, activism, learning environment, etc., etc. I think it's really useful to figure out that if the things aren't working in terms of good experience for the individual just leaves.
Isn't that the point of reality television? Where you can sit there and watch your bad examples without actually interacting with them and having them negatively impact you? Tag.
That's the best argument for watching reality television I've ever heard.
Yes.
Like rather than go through abusive relationships yourself, just watch reality TV, see what it looks like, and then know what to avoid.
Yes.
Had to find a use for it eventually, right?
Yeah, but look, you might try to start looking at reality TV to just kind of anthropologically, psychologically, scientifically extract lessons, and even in terms of character. But how confident are you guys of not becoming kind of engrossed in the gossip and the voyeuristic aspect of it and losing your way? I wouldn't risk it, at least for myself.
I think it would just be important to, like, on balance, spend more time watching good examples to follow, so that most of the time you're sort of filling your head with what you're positively looking for, and then just maybe a minority of the time every now and then remind yourself, all right, that's the kind of stuff we stay away from.
Yes. I think you hit the nail with the hammer. Exactly. Yeah. It's like the motivation. It's like making us afraid of who we were if we actually were espousing and expressing these character traits. Yeah.
I kind of view it as like a trip to the zoo, where I'm not actually going to be like them, the things they do would never occur to me, but afterwards it's like, hey, that was kind of an interesting experience, and at least I don't have to shower as if I was in the cage with them. Tag.
Yeah, one example of learning from the best and also the worst is from the Notes to Himself by Marcus Aurelius. He showers a lot of praise to his direct the emperor that was before him. The actual word escapes me. Antoninus, who was, according to many historians and Marcus Aurelius as well, there's a lot of agreement. He was really an inspiring individual, good character. He kept his cool in many tense situations and was a good manager of the empire. By contrast, he's the guy who was before as an emperor, Hadrian. He was quick to temper. He was getting angry about pretty much anything. He would even enact his anger, get into bouts of rage and fury, and harm people. And so Marcus Aurelius almost does not talk about him in his writings, in his kind of journals, and while focusing on the good example of Antoninus Pius. It's almost like Marcus Aurelius is insulting Hadrian by omission, as if it were. So it might also carry some lights into how we should structure our lives in terms of who we pay attention to.
Yeah, and that's maybe the best argument I've ever heard for deplatforming people. So I think it's more or less the logic they follow. It's like, where if you there's some people where by arguing against them, it's giving them publicity and legitimacy. Whereas if you just ignore them and you refuse to talk to them or to talk about them, that's a better way to go about things. I think maybe in some situations that would be the right thing to do. Like if an agenda was agreed and someone is derailing the agenda in a very counterproductive way, maybe excluding them from proceedings would make quite a bit of sense. But yeah, I also think it's quite risky where someone is actively trying to collaborate and achieve the same agenda. So this could be any kinds of goals in general. But let's say, for the sake of argument, say national welfare or whatever. This would be a controversial thing. People could disagree about how to achieve national welfare and how to do that, and so you might actively try to undermine people who disagree with your notion of how to pursue national welfare by just ignoring them and deplatforming them. And I think that's a bad move. So I think those kinds of disagreements are better openly talked about. But if someone is just trying to distract people away from their agenda, they're just trying to draw attention to themselves and trying to get famous and not pursuing national welfare at all, and really just being destructive, I don't think it makes sense to entertain them for the sake of free speech and be like, yeah, well, everybody has a right to their opinion. I think people can behave in ways that make more sense to exclude them from. I guess there are smaller scale examples as well. I think you brought up a decent example from, say, yoga classes or whatever. And I think in my life, yeah, there's some ways people could show up at a jiu-jitsu class where it's not just a matter of they have some other idiosyncrasies in how to practice jiu-jitsu, but they're really not even showing up doing any jiu-jitsu and breaking some fundamental ground rules that would get them kicked out rather than corrected or disagreed with or tolerated. But yeah, I think giving too much airtime to bad examples, it has this risk where your imagination might start to fill up with bad examples, and you're the first thing you'd think of would be a bad example, where you now have to think of, all right, the first thing I thought to do would be a really bad thing to do. I should avoid doing that. Whereas what you want is the first thing that comes up to your mind be a good option to do, and then to do that. And then if someone else brings up a bad option, you want to then remember, oh, that's a bad option, rather than have your memory so full of bad examples that they're the first thing that comes to mind. I mixed a couple of things there in one little rant, a couple of thoughts. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense. I think there's also always irrationality going on, at least in the background of our mind. And even if we can refute ideas by others, if we're constantly exposed by them, even if we don't agree with them, they will still carry some influence on us just by the sheer abundance of exposition. And so I think this is it's not an argument to censor anyone. I'm against overt censorship. I think it's important also to keep in mind, and I try to remind myself this often, that even though other people are using their freedom of expression to attempt to insult others, and including myself, or constantly complain toxically about anything and everything, even in contradictory ways, like one day complaining about people working too fast, other days people complaining about people working too slow, other days complaining about people paying attention to everything, other days about people not paying enough attention, just like the Aesop fable where people were complaining about the two travelers and the donkey. And so although I don't agree with censorship on these people, especially in public spaces, private people can enforce the rules of their private setting. And the most private setting of all is our own minds, and we have the right to curate what we give attention to, what this manas is doing. We can decide, and I think we should be very careful since this is a finite resource, this attention that we can give, we need to curate what we give attention to with a lot of willpower.
Yeah, I think in my opinion, you hit on a key point with it depends on if you're doing it for yourself or your group, or if you're doing it to somebody outside of your group. Because that's where it's like you're allowed to exert control, within your own group. That's where you can silence people and again, deplatforming people within your own group. But how do you sit there and say that, if two citizens, which one of them gets silenced and which one doesn't, that presumes a certain authority of one of them over the other, and that becomes really problematic in my mind. Okay.
Yeah, I want to respond to both of those. So what you said, Rogerio, actually reminds me of the Buddhist notion of guarding the senses. That's another thing that actually makes a little bit of sense.
or the Bhagavad Gita as well.
Yeah. What you said, Graham, I think it's less about prioritizing some citizens over other citizens, but I think they're like some national interests or some ground rules. Well, in the context of like individual relationships or groups, I think it's usually easy enough, at least for some of the interests of if it's a couple, two people in a relationship, or like a small group, to have like for the interest of the group, this group will not be viable if the following things are violated. So, say if a country allows its intelligence officers to release sensitive military information that make them vulnerable to attack by foreign powers to their enemies, that will make the country's security less viable. So it makes sense for the country to censor intelligence officers that leak military sensitive information to enemies, and maybe even to severely punish them. I don't know if I would say the death penalty is called for, but I think in some countries that's what the penalty is for that kind of treason. So yeah, that kind of treason of the national interest makes sense to punish, and I think maybe in less serious ways than, say, fatal injury, people can act in ways that make a continued friendship or a continued marriage or a continued jiu-jitsu club or a continued study group or whatever less viable. Even if just like significantly risking the viability of the sustainability of the whatever the group is, I think are grounds for censoring. If by censoring we mean like if they could endanger the viability of the group by sharing certain information, you said like no, you're not allowed to share that information. When it comes to countries with military secrets, I think it's obvious to see how sharing them can be super dangerous. In the context of like a jiu-jitsu club, I don't know that many of us have access to the kinds of information that like secrets that we might share that would make the club less viable. So maybe censorship there makes a little less sense with that kind of example. But yeah, I do think there are ways to maybe conduct conversation in a way that just would make people very uncomfortable and like create tensions and create conflicts that would make the club less viable. Like there are certain forms of gossip and lying and spreading rumors and insulting people and manipulating people that would be detrimental to the continuation of the club as a club. And yes, telling people like, no, you're not allowed to do that, to gossip that way or to manipulate people that way. They may say, but I have a right to free speech, like don't censor me. Like no, I don't know, I can't vouch for absolute free speech. I think there are limits where I think you can sin with your like communication, like by saying stuff you could sin. So like there are ways in which you could lie or manipulate or attack people verbally that would not be okay, and I don't think should be protected under free speech. So
they can express themselves freely, but outside of the private group.
Well, and a lot of it's a question of, free speech is without reprise from the government. It's not like it doesn't carry consequences. It just doesn't necessarily carry government sanction against you. And I think what a lot of this boils down to, in my opinion, is the difference between intergroup relations and intra-group relations. And there are things that are perfectly allowed within a group that need to be verboten and disallowed between them. Just like, you're allowed to like smoke cigarettes yourself, but you're not allowed to force other people to smoke them, like secondhand smoke and such. And that's kind of how I see it, is you're allowed to silence within your group, but when you're trying to silence somebody outside your group, that becomes basically social violence, in my opinion. Tag.
Yeah, exactly. Like people ganging together to prevent a lecture at a university that isn't even their university, and they even succeeded in several instances that I've seen. That is really problematic, because people are extending outside of their own privacy, their own domain. They're kind of reaching out to the domains of others, and they're manipulating others to silence other people, which is a really it brings consequences, and probably consequences that people won't be happy with. People that are more conservative will react violently to these things in legalistic and political ways, by tending to vote for people that are even more authoritarian and hard-lined against these kinds of abuses. And so this also kind of showcases this karma idea in the real world without any supernatural ideas. And also the idea of keeping secrets was also mentioned by Marcus Aurelius to his antecessor Antoninus. He said that Antoninus scarcely kept secrets about government and his life, but the ones he kept were really the ones that are important for the national security, the security of the empire, etc. And he wasn't at all paranoid compared to Hadrian. Hadrian had a lot of vices and secrets and skeletons in the closet and whatnot, and he was always spying all over the place, getting info on what other people were talking about him, and he was constantly worried with what other people were saying about him, and this would make him kind of hate people's freedom to talk, to much less to talk about him. It probably turned Hadrian into a free speech hater, while Antoninus simply didn't care about gossip, about people talking, bad mouthing him or whatnot, because he was perfectly aware of the characteristics of his character, and thus these things wouldn't touch him. And I think the contrast between these two figures in this example is useful nowadays as well.
Yeah. Well, we probably shouldn't talk at length about these things. It was a fun discussion. So hopefully, without opening another can of worms, I'll close off with my last comment about this, and then you guys can talk as much as you want about it. I'd like to point out, like, some of these people who sort of shut down or deplatform people they don't want to speak, do so by exercising their own freedom of speech. So, like, they're infringing on others' freedom of speech by engaging in their own freedom of speech, so basically yelling and shouting over someone else so that they can't be heard, which is a problematic application of their own free speech, and like maybe shouldn't be tolerated. But like in either way, you'd say like the speech that is being suppressed by free speech should be allowed to flourish by suppressing the free speech that is used to suppress the free speech. So it gets a little complicated. But yeah, I think in most cases it's, especially when it comes to doing philosophy or talking about plans and stuff, talking things out and having things in the open is better than suppressing things and quieting and hushing people down. And that's all I'll say today about that. Because we'll get, if like the two people who watch this may get angry at us and decide not to watch it next time.
Sure. I won't object to what you said. It's pretty reasonable, and I think people should use good sense above common sense in dealing with these issues, and avoid extremes of behavior.
That I was going to echo that one. It's about balance. It's about neither one of them is an ideal choice, and you want to avoid either extreme because either extreme gets toxic. And you know that's I think that's probably my way of looking at it. Is most of these things, it's the Hegelian synthesis that you want to be working with. Heg.
Hegel is not a bad place to end a philosophy discussion on, I guess.
Yeah. The be all end all.
I would say that, but definitely an interesting person to think about.
The Hegelian synthesis allows you that kumbaya moment. Tag.
All right, so looking forward to some more Vaisheshika next week. Thanks for joining. It's always interesting to talk to you guys and fun to study this stuff with you.
Same.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, and thanks to all the viewers. See you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.